I'm Steve Lascalzo, and this is The Way. Welcome to the April 2024 This is The Way podcast Star Wars news update. Before we get to the news, I have some feedback from a longtime listener that I want to share, along with an apology that's the result of that feedback, and it stems from something I said about characters that are being made into action figures by Hasbro. And I mentioned this last month in our collectors news segment about how I hoped the Acolyte fails and all of these characters get thrown into landfills. All right, so here's the feedback. Daniel C. writes, "Hey Steve, listening to the latest episode of This is the Way. Glad to have the regular monthly recaps, but why hope for something to fail? Or I hope it gets tossed in a landfill, as you said on the episode. Just seems like a weird thing to hope for, especially for something that hasn't even come out yet. As a Black Series collector, I'm glad to see new figures come out. It's not often that we get more and brand new Jedi characters. I'm more partial to Troopers and OT characters myself, but I am still glad that Hasbro isn't just relying on repaints all the time, and making efforts to support new shows in addition to releasing figures for old ones, Episode 1, Anakin and Padme, for instance. First, thank you for writing in. We don't get a lot of feedback, and so I take it very seriously at this point when someone does send me messages, and I don't always answer them all on the podcasts, but this was one I felt deserved it. And so I wrote back with a lengthy response. And I'm not sure that sat well with Daniel, but feedback like this is important. It started a dialogue, and soon after I started writing back and forth, I realized, I don't necessarily agree that making new characters into action figures is always the greatest thing, but he is right. Why root for this to fail? Now, he and I can have differences of opinion. I do think it's great that they have new characters, but for a new show, that's something that is unusual. They don't usually go with brand new characters. They'll sometimes, like for Obi-Wan Kenobi, they will do like an Obi-Wan Kenobi character from the show. They'll do stuff like that, but they don't usually just like a brand new character that's never appeared anywhere else, suddenly make an action figure and release it in advance of the show, almost kind of hoping, to help along like the marketing of the show. Rooting for it to fail, though, maybe that's an okay feeling for me to have. It's okay to feel like Star Wars is leaving me behind, right? But why would I want to share that on my podcast? I don't want Leslie Headland or Lucasfilm to keep doing what they've been doing. Success would continue that, right? I don't have to feel sorry about feeling that way. But, this is not about keeping things real or being totally transparent. I just felt like I had to answer a question for myself, and that question was, what am I hoping to accomplish? So I'm worried that Star Wars isn't not just being made for me anymore, but it's being made, to spite me or to people like me who have this affinity for the way Star Wars used to be. And I have to admit, that is really a silly notion. It's not the attempt to influence that's the problem in my main podcast. If I do a podcast about a show and I talk about how bad it is, that's a valid opinion. And I am not just somebody off the street. I have training in journalism. I can, I can prepare an argument, and I can look objectively or more objectively than others at created content, not just because I am a creator myself, but because I, again, have training. But to overtly be negative in a news podcast serves no purpose. So it doesn't make anyone feel better, not even me. And who am I trying to reach with that negativity? There's a reason why overly positive podcasters and vloggers and YouTubers and stuff, there's a reason that they have more success. And that's because they don't focus on the negatives. And I'm not focusing on a negative here, but I don't have to do this. I don't have to do this podcast. It's not hard, but it does take my time. I do a lot of research and I do a lot of preparation, and I try to put a lot of effort into my podcast because I felt like I was being unserved by other creators. A lot of other podcasters, I've given them a listen. I even had a thing in the past where I was like, hey, tell me about your favorite podcasters. And some people wrote in with their own podcast, like saying, hey, listen to ours and promote it. And some of them are really bad. They're not just their quality. They're overly positive in the exact way that I was overly negative. They won't see they don't have any objectivity, and it's on the other side. They're not serving the purpose that I wanted out of podcasts, and that's why I started creating one, because I wanted to start a podcast about The Mandalorian, and I thought I was really convinced that this was the new way of Star Wars. That, going back with a retro look was the way, that was what I wanted to see. But the only thing that my comments about the action figures did was potentially lose listeners. There's no one else is going to root for it to fail like I am, because they're not in my headspace. Most of you listening have been doing so for a long time. According to the data I have, it's not like I'm getting a lot of new viewers. I don't have a controversy. I'm just dutifully creating content in the hopes that someday, somewhere, it reaches a larger audience. But I'm not spending money on marketing. I'm not trying to go viral. All I can do at this point is lose some of you as listeners. And that is definitely not my goal. I don't want to lose those of you who have been coming to me because I've been serving, or I've been scratching that itch, in other words. All I can promise is that I will try and do better. I have to start thinking about the way that I'm sharing my feelings about Star Wars. So I appreciate this feedback. I cannot promise that you will always agree with me, like Daniel and but I am sorry that I failed you and that I failed Daniel. And I'm sorry that I let you down. And I hope you can forgive me. But if you have feedback or comments, don't be afraid to share them. Stay with this podcast. I will share details again, as I do every episode, about how you can interact with this podcast later on. But please know that I am not above being corrected. And like I said, I don't necessarily always agree with you, but I will certainly listen to you and consider your feedback and your opinions, because I value you, because without you, I'm just screaming into the void. And while I may not wish for the Acolyte to succeed because of the politics of the people involved in creating it, I don't have to be overly negative and say things about, what the action figures haven't done anything to me, and I haven't even, like he said, I haven't even seen them yet. So you see pictures. We don't know how well the show's going to do. We don't know how well the marketing is going to do, and it's pointless for me to be negative about it at this point. Again, Daniel, I'm so sorry, and please don't leave me.
Everything's going to be all right, kid.
If you do, that's okay too. If this is the last podcast episode that you listen to from This Is the Way podcast, well, I wish you well. I certainly understand if that's your feeling. All right, it's time to update you on Star Wars news since the last news update podcast. Speaking of the Acolyte, it's aiming high. Actress Daphne Keane told Entertainment Weekly that the goal with filming action with lightsaber scenes for the crew and cast of the Acolyte is to surpass the excellence set by The Phantom Menace's Duel of the Fates duel between Obi-Wan Kenobi, Qui-Gon Jinn, and Darth Maul. Now, why am I considering this news? Well, it's not news in itself, but her comment ended up stirring contrasting opinions on Star Wars social media this month. So, goes with how I started this podcast episode. In light of the way that I started and the recent feedback, I started to remember something that John Lennon once said about the Beatles. He was referencing the music group's fame, and he said, they were more popular than Jesus. Now, I love the music of the Beatles, and I'm also a Christian, and I know how a lot of Christians back then took those comments. But I can hear that comment and understand it, just like I can hear Daphne Keane and understand her. Lennon didn't say the Beatles were more important. He didn't say they were better than Jesus or bigger than Jesus. But sometimes people recalling his story or recalling that news from the 60s will hear something different in their own mind. They'll say, he did say, he said they were more important or bigger or better than Jesus. Keane, in speaking of Star Wars, did not claim that they accomplished their goal. She just referenced a great moment, saying we're trying to emulate, we're trying to surpass the greatness of that duel, which many, many Star Wars fans consider one of the better lightsaber duels in Star Wars. So, what I'm trying to say is, this is not Rachel Zegler spouting woke nonsense about Snow White and the Seven Dwarves. This is just Daphne Keane saying, hey, we respect the old stuff, and, we are trying to outdo, we are endeavoring to outdo what came before. She's not saying that they succeeded, and she's not saying that, we did. She's just saying we're trying. So, again, she is not the problem here. This is not an instance where I'm agreeing with the large group of people who are saying, how dare you? This is just an actress trying to say we respect and we're reverential to what came before. So I think this is totally fine. Earlier in April, Empire magazine released new images and character details about the Acolyte. And now we're only a little more than a month away from the first two episodes. June 4th is going to be the first two episodes of the Acolyte. And a couple more notes before we switch off the show. Showrunner Headland made reference to her treatment of the character of Vernester Rowe, a High Republic novel character making a live-action debut. Now, I'm not interested in the novels, but since they're coming to live action, or one of them is at least, I'm especially interested whenever someone in the past is suddenly called powerful and legendary, since Star Wars, we know the Skywalkers at the end of the Jedi line. And if they're supposed to be super powerful and, super in tune with the Force, well, when you start saying that people in the past were really powerful and really amazing, I have a problem with it, because why didn't we hear about her at any point from Yoda or someone else? And I know that, there's a lot we don't see in Star Wars, but I just have a problem when they start retconning. Not, they're not saying that that she's better than than Anakin or Luke even, or Yoda. But, well, okay, so Ro has two interesting tidbits. One, at the time, in the novels, she was called one of the youngest Jedi Masters ever. And then second, she doesn't just have a lightsaber, she has a light whip. Yes, a light whip. This is another point of contention for me, and for some people that's great. For me and people like me and my friends, we are going to look differently upon this show, I think. Okay, there's actually cast news this month for The Acolyte as well. A new name was added to the cast of the show, and it was revealed on John Roca and Jeff Snyder's The Hot Mic podcast. David Harewood will have a small role on The Acolyte, and he may be best known for his role on the DC show Supergirl on the CW. He was Martian Manhunter. And finally, one more news note on The Acolyte. A South Korean TV spot introduced by Lee Jung-jae showed Nemoidians, which as far as I can remember is the first time that we've seen that race since there was a slaughter of some of them. The Trade Federation on Mustafar when Anakin killed them all. The first appearance of those characters, of course, was in The Phantom Menace, and that seemed to make some people uncomfortable back then. Some people said that they were stereotypically Asian coded, and if you're using them in an Asian television ad now in today's day and age, I think that's an indication that the rest of the world probably doesn't feel the way that some of those more liberal Americans do. But I noticed that when I watched the TV spot, and I didn't hear many people talking about it, but go back and look, or go look online for that trailer. The show's coming out in just a little bit more than a month. So we're going to see more and more of the show leaked out, or at Comic-Cons, or online, just in different languages. And a lot of times they have footage that we don't see from the main StarWars.com or Star Wars YouTube site. We will see some different little clips and things in those different languages or those different promos. So keep your eye out. And if you don't want to be spoiled, then it's going to be really tough in the next couple of weeks, because I'm sure they're going to have more and more leading up to it, because they're putting a lot of eggs into this basket.
Your eyes can deceive you.
What about The Bad Batch? Well, it's getting closer to wrapping up the final season, and in fact, I think there's just one episode left. It airs at the start of May. I had a great discussion with a friend visiting from out of town in mid-April. We were having dinner in downtown Tampa, and we were chatting about Star Wars, and then a hostess at Eulalie overheard us talking and chimed in. She loves Star Wars, and she grew up watching the movies, but she just started watching The Mandalorian and was somewhere near the start of season 2. I was really excited to hear this younger person's opinions, and while she was mostly interested in live action shows, my friend Joe recommended The Bad Batch to her, and he's been enjoying that with his family. He, like me, has been enjoying the third season more than the second, but I don't enjoy the third season that much, so that's not really saying a lot, but I definitely have been enjoying it more than the second, and he agreed with me. The first volume of the soundtrack as well for season 3 is available now on Spotify. There are 39 tracks. Since it's volume 1, it stands to reason there's going to be a volume 2, probably released this week. The finale of the show, season 3 and the series, streams on May 1st, which is tomorrow as of the recording of this podcast. I'm recording it on Tuesday morning, April 30th.
Palpatine was one step ahead of us during the war, and he's still several steps ahead of us.
You know, I mentioned that dinner and the Star Wars fan, but I forgot to mention the show that we all agreed may be the best show, even if it's not my favorite, Andor. We all, the three of us, praised that show, and I got to share my favorite tidbit with her and Joe about the showrunner, Gilroy being the writer of The Cutting Edge.
Good!
Okay.
Listen, I say he's a great writer. I think his resume of work bears that out. But the Writers Guild of America also thinks he's great, because Gilroy was presented with the Ian McClellan Hunter Award for Career Achievement during a ceremony in mid-April. Now, that's fantastic, but he had a couple things to say about his current project to the press after the ceremony. WGA East posted a video on X so you can listen to him talk about it. He said he's had a lot of fun over the years, but he doesn't know if he's ever done anything as important as the 24 hours of storytelling he's doing now with Andor. He's definitely saying all the right things, right? They're halfway done with those 24 hours. You know, season 2 is also going to be 12 episodes, just like season 1. And those episodes will likely start airing in 2025. Now, when a great writer is excited about a great show and calls it not just some of his most fun work, but some of his most important, how can you not be excited for what's coming with Season 2 of Andor. Let's go! Late this month, there was an article on Variety that mentioned Skeleton Crew. So I wanted to pass along news since there actually is some news finally about the Skeleton Crew. It's been months, I think. And it's not huge. But since the show hasn't been talked about that much lately, an actress heaping praise on the production and fellow actors ends up being newsworthy and carrying a little bit more weight than it would with a whole bunch of news coming out about the show. So it's as a result of Kerry Condon's press work for a show called In the Land of Saints and Sinners that's airing on Netflix or streaming on Netflix. But when she was asked about Skeleton Crew, she talked about how she doesn't have kids, but she would pay to see this show. And she worked with out-of-this-world good child actors. She said it's amazing and innocent and playful and lovely, and those are all good things to hear. Now, she's got a vested interest in it, but it's better than talking about how tough it was or difficult or, it's really going to shock people. There's nothing controversial, and as far as I'm concerned, that's a good thing. But there was another note that I noticed from reading the article. Variety is taking it as a fact that the show will be coming later this year. It didn't say what day or what month. It just said the show will be airing later this year because it talked about how she was going to be involved in all these different projects. And it talked about Skeleton Crew airing in 2024. Now, I imagine if there ends up being good press around the Acolyte show, that somewhere in the mid-run of that series, we may end up getting a date for the Skeleton Crew as well.
Don't you ever want to join me? It's exciting.
Star Wars gamers, The Mandalorian is getting a board game. The Mandalorian Adventures is a cooperative card-based game that will take the story beats from the show The Mandalorian and then turn those into playable missions. The description given by the developers to the web magazine outlet Polygon.com, makes it seem like you need someone who's an experienced gamer to really help get the rules and the way to play. But it also said, the early gameplay is supposed to be easy and onboarding to people who don't board game a lot. I could repeat the rules that they mentioned and the way to play from the article, but listen, that's not why I'm mentioning this. You can read the article if you'd like. It's just something different. It's a card and board game, no dice. 1 to 4 players. Games can take up to 1 hour. There's a recommended age of 12, but you could probably, if you got a smart kid, you could probably play earlier than that. It comes with a rule book, mission book, 191 cards, 20 mini cards, 142 tokens, 8 character standees, and 2 envelopes in the box. And the game is said to have a hidden trader mode that will add variety to repeat gameplay. It is designed by Corey Konezka, and that seems to be the real news. I don't know who he is, but it calls him an acclaimed designer of strategy games like Star Wars Rebellion and Battlestar Galactica, the board game. So if you like those board games, you might love Star Wars The Mandalorian Adventures board game. If you're interested, I recommend searching for that article on the Polygon.com website, posted April 25th. And just so you know, the game is available for pre-order right now, $50 at Asmodee Games, and there's a shipping date of August 2nd. Also in gaming news, the Knights of the Old Republic remake project is not dead, at least according to Saber Interactive's CEO, Matt Karch. Now, I could only find one report that the game's development was halted, and there have been several articles disputing that claim. But I think it's okay to be skeptical when it comes to comments about projects which might be designed to sway investors. So this is a beloved game. The remake was announced more than 2 years ago, and there's still nothing. So there's no indication that there's anything close to a release date. There's no indication that they're still in development. The only real news that we've been able to report has been of the Doomsday kind. Even though I just told you the CEO is still saying it's a go, I think it's reasonable to doubt him because he's got a vested interest in telling people, no, it's still being in development. Star Wars Outlaws isn't just in development. The game released a new trailer this month and is confirming an August 30th release. So that's a big difference. This game wasn't even announced 2 years ago. KOTOR was. So consider that. So there are two news notes worthy of mentioning about Star Wars Outlaws. First, Kira is going to be in the game, but she will not be voiced by Emilia Clarke, who played her in Solo. Hopefully they get someone who can approximate her voice so there's not this stark difference between the game and Solo versions of the character. But this is going to be a really big bounty hunting game. They're talking about a lot of different factions, and they're bringing in different background characters from some of the movies to be new crime syndicates. They're putting a lot of effort into this game. It doesn't mean it's going to be great. So there is mention from the developers about mini games. So the second news note is Sabacc in the game going to be playable? Well, I will read a quote from a Game Informer article by Outlaw's lead systems designer, Matt Delisle, and you'll have to determine for yourself, all right? He says, if you have a good reputation once you've worked good rep with the Pike Syndicate, for example, you'll be able to freely go in, and then you can get access to a bunch of opportunities. That can be things like jobs for the syndicates, merchants with some of the better stuff for sale, intel, rumors, and can also be high-stakes Sabacc tables. So, if there is a playable Sabacc game in Star Wars Outlaws, I gotta admit, that does raise my interest level.
You're good. Yeah. You're very good.
But not good enough. What's a buck?
Okay, collectors. I promise, no more talking about rooting for things to be in landfills. I mean, I may have that opinion, but I'm going to try not to share that opinion anymore because, it serves no purpose. Sorry, Daniel. There is a Black Series 4-pack droid set from The Mandalorian featuring Peli Motto's pit crew that is going to be coming available. R5-D4, 2 pit droids, and we get the alphanumeric designation for that BD unit that showed up in Peli Motto's hangar in Season 3 of The Mandalorian. It's BD-72. Now, I wonder if that's 72. Maybe is that when Dave Filoni was born in 1972? I'm not sure. 4 figures, 7 accessories, 2 of which are removable rocket thrusters. So, that's why you have to really look and see when it says 7 accessories, some of those are, if 2 of them are rocket thrusters, 1 for each side, is that really 2 different accessories? Anyway, it's in pre-order now on Target.com for $45. It has a release date of July 21st, 2024. Now, if Mandos are more your thing, there's a blue Mandalorian privateer, one of the ones that we saw on the planet with Jack Black and Lizzo's character in Season 3 of The Mandalorian. It's also in pre-order from Target. Same summer release date for $25. Now, I have to be honest and say, this is a pass. Do not buy this. It's a nameless character with only 2 accessories, a jetpack and a blaster, and no face. Now, I know that this is a higher quality Black Series version. And every time I say, don't buy it, you have to really decide, is it worth it? It's not a limited quantity item, but sometimes those things that no one buys are the things that 30 years down the line end up being the collector's item because it's like, oh, nobody bought this, nobody has this, it's very rare because there wasn't a lot sold. So those could end up being collector's items. I say no. I say, because there's no, it's a helmeted character. You're really just trying to fill out background characters if you're doing a lot of setting up of the characters on the mantle or something like that. You got to spend your money wisely. These things are not cheap. It's not like you're throwing $5 away here or getting them in a bargain bin. If you do find it in a bargain bin or at like Goodwill or something like that in the box, maybe that's when you pick one of those things up. The Vintage Collection got 2 new editions this month. Cal Kestis in Imperial Officer Disguise version from Star Wars Jedi Survivor. That comes with BD-1 in black and orange paint, a blaster in an unlit, and a blue lit version of his lightsaber. There's also a Mandalorian judge that we saw in the covert in Season 3. The judge is the one that was scoring the duel between Grogu and the Foundling. He appears to have a jetpack and a blaster as accessories, and I say he because the voice sounded like a he. Now, there are hot toys as well. There's going to be a Death Star Stormtrooper that comes with, well, it's called Death Star Environment. It's the deco wall with the backlight, the backlights to their oval-shaped diffusions. So the light's coming through those oval-shaped. You saw them also in, I think, The Last Jedi in the elevator and stuff like that. You will recognize it as soon as you see it. It's $240 though, and it's in pre-order now on the Sideshow Collectibles website, and it ships later this year. There's also a Chrome Commander Cody for some unknown reason. I don't think he's ever ended up being in in a chrome outfit. I think this is one of those things that's a repaint. It is a Sideshow Collectibles exclusive, so I guess that's the reason why it's just an exclusive. $260. It's in pre-order now. There is a limit of 1 per person, but for $260, if you're buying 2 of them, I think you can find a way. It is said to ship somewhere between June and September of this year. I don't know what it's in conjunction with. I think it's just something that they can do as a special and exclusive. There are also some comics and Legends characters getting hot toy treatments. BT-1, an astromech from the Dr. Aphra comics, and not the only one that's getting a hot toy. $220 for BT-1, ships from October 2024 to March of next year. There's 000, a protocol droid, also from the Dr. Aphra comic. It's a Sideshow exclusive, it's called. Supposed to ship this year, but it's not on pre-order. It's waitlisted on their website at last check. Then there's Lord Starkiller from Legends. 2 editions listed on Sideshow.com. Each appears to be about $270, but there is a collector's edition version and a Sideshow exclusive version. The only difference that I could see was that there was a collectible coin for what it called select markets. The limited version is only available until May 5th or 6th, so you need to act fast. You may even be listening to this podcast after that time, so I'm sorry if you are. Each of those different selections has the same pre-order and shipping window status of April of next year to September of 2025. So that's coming in the distant future. And then there's Darth Revan, also from Legends. It's also $270 with a limited edition and collector's edition. Same limited time window, same pre-order, same shipping window as the just mentioned Starkiller figure. The real looker, though, is the Clone Wars version of Anakin Skywalker, modeled on Hayden Christensen as he's seen in the Ahsoka show. That is $265 from Sideshow Collectibles, in pre-order now on their website, and it ships in the first half of next year.
Just one more thing.
Well, we're already past the 30-minute mark, so we've got Disney Parks news, and then that's it. April saw new scenes added to Star Tours, a limited-time character appearance at Galaxy's Edge for Seasons of the Force by Sabine Wren, and the return of the BD units walking around in Batuu. There are also new offerings in the Build Your Own Lightsaber area inside the parks. Yes, Savi's Workshop is updating their offerings to include High Republic-themed parts, but I recommend double-checking before you book to make sure that you can get what you want there. Now, I'm talking more about the gift shops, the ones at the end of the Star Tours ride, and then there was Once Upon a Toy at Disney Springs. Those are places where you can put together a plastic lightsaber. The price is now $35 for a single lightsaber creation, $40 for a deluxe single blade, $50 for a dual blade, and then $60 for a dual blade deluxe. Now, what's deluxe? It's when you have cross guards like Kylo Ren or a spinning blade hilt like an Inquisitor. Those are considered deluxe. The pieces do look a little less impressive to me, and they're actually even different than I've seen in the past. Now, I don't know if that means they changed manufacturers, or maybe it's just the way it looks in the picture. I'd have to see them up close and personal to really be sure. But the blade colors seem to be a dark red now, not like a bright red, but a dark red. There's yellow, and it's not like a bright, vibrant yellow. It's more like a dark mustard bottle yellow. There's purple, which doesn't look, I mean, I know it might look different when you shine a light in it, but it just doesn't look the same. And then there's bright red, white, or off-white. I couldn't really tell. Maybe it was the way that the color temperature in the photo was. And then there's blue and green, of course. We did this once for our family. We still have that saber somewhere in our house, but it's a blue cross-bladed version. It's just something that my daughters and I created for ourselves. You start by picking up the end cap for a single blade, and then an adapter for a double-bladed saber, and then you choose the chassis for the blade, the color of it, then the activation switch cover, and then you put a sleeve to fill out the hilt, and then there's the emitter, or the deluxe emitters that actually light up when you hit the button. Again, these are not the high-quality lightsabers that I'm talking about. These are not the ones from the workshop experience where they might be heavier, they might look nicer on a mandrel. These are more like the kinds of collapsible, extendable plastic varieties that you might see in the toy aisle at Target or Walmart. But since it was announced on a number of vloggers and YouTube websites that there was this change coming, I thought I'd pass it along.
I think we can let him off with the warning this time.
Okay, folks, if you think I missed something, or you disagree with me, or you have feedback like Daniel, send email to thisisthewaypodcast@gmail.com. But you can also interact with us like Daniel did through our Facebook website. This Is the Way podcast has a number of different offerings. You can find our links in one place at linktr.ee/This Is The Way Pod. Thank you so much for joining me, your host, for This Is The Way Podcast's April 2024 Star Wars News Update. Until next time, I'm Steve Lascauso. May the Force be with you, always.